Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Allen. Sorry I couldn't be with you this morning to help learn some anatomy. As you probably are aware, I've been homesick with a COVID infection. It got the better of me last week on Thursday, and I've been running a fever since Thursday, but I feel much stronger today, and I anticipate I will be with you on Wednesday, okay? When I come to class, I will be wearing a mask. So, if you haven't recently gotten a booster for COVID, you might want to do so because it really got me hard. So I hope you're doing well. And what I'm going to do here is run a little video session with you as though I was in front of you in class to teach you some anatomy. Now, one of the things that I would do is start with a practice quiz, a quiz to give you an idea of what the actual lab exam is going to be like in 2 weeks, which will be September 23rd. So let's do a practice quiz. So what I'm going to ask you to do is get out a piece of scrap paper, something you could write 3 answers on. I'm going to show you 3 practice images, okay? On the actual day of the exam, you will be given a total of 1 minute's time to identify the anatomy before you. I will show you each image twice, once for 40 seconds, and then a second time for 20 seconds. So again, you'll have 40 and 20 is 60. You'll have a total of 60 seconds to identify each piece of anatomy, okay? So go ahead and pause this video if you need. Get yourself a piece of scrap paper. And if you want to have your word bank in front of you, that's okay, because on the exam day, you will have a word bank that I provide. It will be an alphabetized word bank, okay? But do your best and see how well you do on this practice quiz right now, okay? So if you need to take a moment, go ahead and pause the video, and then we'll get started. Okay, so we're going to get started with the practice quiz. I'm going to show you an image, and I'm going to state a question. The question is going to either be name the identity of the bone, name the bone, identify the bone. And if that's the question, you tell me the name of the bone. Or I might say, name the substructure. And if that's the case, I need you to tell me the piece of the bone, the region of the bone. Okay, let's try it and see how well you do, okay? So I'm going to start sharing my screen with you so I can do all the good stuff I need to do. Okay, here we go. All right, so coming up here will be your first image, okay? First practice image, please tell me the name of this bone. Tell me the bone. I'll give you 30 seconds. Go ahead. Do your best to identify the bone and write it down on your practice paper. This is not for course credit. It won't hurt you. Okay, so that was 40 seconds. That's what you'll get for each round of images I show you on the actual exam. Let's go to the second practice question. The second practice question is going to be name the substructure. Name the substructure. Here we go. Practice question 2. Name the substructure of this bone. You have 40 seconds. Go ahead. and that's 40 seconds. Okay, we're going to go to the third practice image. And again, the question for the third image is going to be name the substructure of the bone. Third practice image, name the substructure. Here you go. Name the substructure. And that is 40 seconds. Now, if this was the real exam, and I had just completed showing you all the images once, I would go back around for a second go. So you'd see each image a second time for 20 seconds, okay? I won't do that here today with you since we're just doing a little practice. So let's see how well you do, okay? Take a look at your answer sheet. What is the name of this bone? Hopefully you know that this is the palatine bone, right? It is the palatine bone. That was the answer to question 1. Second image, what is the substructure of this bone? Well, you got to start off by knowing, well, this is your scapula, right? So what is this circled region of the bone? That would be the subscapular fossa. The answer to image 2, the answer to what is the substructure is subscapular fossa. And finally, the third practice question, what is the substructure? The answer to this question, first you have to identify the bone, right? This is clearly the ulna, and the substructure up here is the radial notch. So one more time, very quickly. The first one is palatine bone. Second one is subscapular fossa. Third one is the radial notch. If you got all 3 of them, well done. If not, hey, that's okay. You still have 2 weeks to prepare, okay? So at this point, it's my hope that you've been through much of your anatomy word bank since the course has started, at least one time looking at everything, but I know it's a lot to memorize and you have to do a little bit every day. So keep at it, keep working it. Next class, when I visit with you next Monday, we'll have a second practice quiz to help give you confidence that you can do well on the actual exam. Okay? So keep working hard. All right. Now, let's go to visible body here. Let's go to visible body. And let's continue some coverage of the anatomy of the body. Okay, I'm going to bring up a little Word document here. You know, last time we were together, which was the first Monday of the semester, because you all missed for Labor Day, we did talk about the skull anatomy. We got the first 2 vertebrae of the vertebral column identified. Basically, I was working on the axial skeleton, okay? So I would encourage you to follow along with me, okay? Bring up the anatomy software on your own computer. And if you have enough screen space, you can put the video and the software next to each other. If not, well, then watch the video once, maybe take some notes and go back and review on your own time, okay? So I'm going to go to the full skeleton, and I'm just going to highlight the frontal bone. And if I go up to the selected structure window and click that icon, notice some other terms pop up. I'm going to click the topmost term, calvaria. I'm going to click the next topmost term, skull. Then I'm going to see the word axial. If you click on that, the software is going to highlight the axial skeleton for you. Okay, without going into the weeds of details right now, right? The axial skeleton is basically your skull, your vertebral column, your hyoid bone, your ribs, and your sternum. Okay, that's basically your axial skeleton right there. Okay, so we're going to continue down the vertebral column, and a little bit later today, we will try to get down one of your arms to the point of covering your fingers. Okay, that's our goal for today, is basically where I'm going to end the video. Okay, so if there are questions that come up during your review of the video, hey, write them down, bring them into class next time, we'll talk about them. Okay, all right, so let's continue here. Last time we were together, we were talking about your vertebral column, first two vertebra. Okay, I'm not going to rehash things because there's lots to do, but you may always ask when we're in lab together. So let's take a look at the vertebral column first. If I go over to systems and I click the ligament button, and what I want to do is get rid of all this connective tissue that's kind of blocking things. There we go. Okay, now go ahead and click any vertebra, and in the selected structure window, keep going up until you find the term vertebral column. Just highlight the vertebral column. Okay, there's your vertebral column. No mystery here. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Once you've had a chance to look at your entire vertebral column, go ahead and click one of the cervical vertebrae. Okay, I happen to have clicked C2. Go ahead and click the C2 label in the selected structure window and click the cervical spine, and it's going to highlight this, all the cervical vertebrae. Okay, all right, the software put those darn ligaments back in, so I'm going to click them off again. There we go. So cervical vertebra, cervical spine. There we go. Notice you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 cervical vertebrae. Okay. Seven cervical vertebrae. Next, you have the thoracic vertebrae. What distinguishes the thoracic vertebrae from the cervical and lumbar vertebrae is that the thoracic vertebrae are the only ones that have ribs coming off of them. Okay, so you know they're thoracic if you can see a rib coming off of it. So we'll click one of these. Here's thoracic vertebra 2. Go up and click the thoracic spine, and let's shrink it down on your screen so you can count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Wow, we have 12 thoracic vertebrae. Okay, 12 of them. You can see what they look like through the rib cage itself. Okay, no mysteries here. Let's keep going down. Select the first lumbar vertebra and go up to the selected structure window and click lumbar spine. And let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 lumbar vertebrae. Okay. Right. And then, of course, below that, we do have the sacrum. Sacrum is one large bone that is formed by the fusion of 5 primitive sacral bones before you're born. Okay, so there's 5 little tiny bones that have been fused together into one complete sacrum. You don't have to know the 5 individual tiny bones of the sacrum. All you have to be able to do is identify the one large sacrum. And you know that your tailbone is the coccyx. Okay, so we have one sacrum, 5 fused bones, and one coccyx or tailbone. Okay, so hopefully there's no mystery on that. Let's take a look at a thoracic vertebrae in a little bit more detail. Okay, so I'm going to pick one of them here, T7, and I'm going to isolate it out. So you could do T7 or any others, it doesn't matter, but I'm doing T7. Okay, I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to isolate it. Okay. And so what I want to do is highlight some of the important regions for you. Okay. Now you can do this yourself at home, and that's what the software is good at doing, but you got to put it in your memory banks, right? So if we highlight it, let's do the details icon. Okay. There's some things here of particular importance. First off, this yellow knobby thing right here, right? If I click on it, you're going to see it's the superior articular process. So this entire momentarily highlighted blue stub, like a finger, if you will, is a process. On your word bank, you don't have the word process listed, I don't believe. What you do have is the word facet. So this is the superior articular process, and the surface of the process that I'm going to highlight right here. The surface of the process is the facet. Okay, so the entire finger is the process, but the surface, the one surface of the finger, is the facet. So a facet is a surface of something, in this case, of process. Okay, so if I were to ask you what this is on an exam, if you tell me superior articular process or superior articular facet, I'm going to give you credit in both cases. Okay, but I want to highlight what the software is telling you. Now, why does this matter? It matters because, let me clear my drawing here. It matters because the superior articular process, really the facet, the surface of the process of a vertebra, a bottom vertebra, is what interfaces with the inferior articular facet of a vertebra that sticks on top of it and stacks. Okay, let's take a look at this. So let me de-highlight everything here. If you have yours highlighted, just go back here again, okay? Now, this is T7, so we need something to stack on top of this, which would be T6. So go down to Anatomy Search and type in T06, and keep going down into your menu until you find T6 vertebra, and add it. 1, 2, 3, add. If at any point I'm going too fast while at your home, hey, just pause the video. Just pause it. All right. So what I want to highlight for you is this, right? Let me deselect things here, but let me highlight this for you. Okay. So here is the superior articular process of the bottom vertebra. Here is the superior articular facet of the process of the bottom vertebra. And you notice it has interfaced with the vertebra on top of it. The vertebra on top of it has its inferior articular process here, Excuse me. And the inferior articular process has its facet or inferior articular surface right here. And the point I'm trying to make is that as the vertebrae stack together to form your vertebral column, it's always the case that the bottom vertebra's superior articular facet interfaces with the top vertebra's inferior articular facet. That's how the jigsaw puzzle of your vertebral column fits together. Okay? So please spend some time thinking about how these bones come together. Start thinking about the joints, right? Joints are locations where two bones come together. All right. If you have questions about that, please bring it into class. Okay. Next, I'm going to clear the drawing on that. And also want to highlight for you how your ribs are going to be attached to your thoracic vertebra. Your ribs are going to touch basically 2 points of each thoracic vertebra. They're going to touch basically, and I'm not the best drawer here, but it's going to touch basically in this region here and this region here. And the rib itself is going to kind of wind out this way and come back around to your front. It's a little deceptive in 2 dimensions. You really got to look at it in 3 dimensions. Okay, but let's take a look at a highlighted vertebra so you can see what I'm talking about. Let's see, before we do anything else, let's add a rib. We need to add the 6th rib. Go down to anatomy search and type in ribs. And or let me see, maybe rib would be better. Just do rib and look for the 6th rib on the right side. 6th rib on the right side. 1, 2, 3, add. There we go. Okay, I didn't do too bad here. Okay, let's take a look at this. Let's shrink this down. You can see the head of the rib here is attached roughly to the body of the vertebra here. And the bumpy part of the rib, where my cursor currently is called a tubercle, is touching right here, which is the transverse process of the vertebra. Okay, so let me move that back into position, right? It's a little finicky, but that's basically how the rib is touching the vertebra. Take a look at it through multiple viewing perspectives. Look at it in pictures in your book. Let me highlight an individual vertebra and go up to details. Okay, so the rib that we had placed on your screen a moment ago touched here, the superior costal facet, which on your word bank is called the superior costal parentheses demifacet for the head of the rib. And also here, this white area is the costal facet of the transverse process. This is where your rib tubercle touches, okay? The rib tubercle. So again, the rib is going to touch at 2 places on the vertebra, here and here. Okay. We might be able to do a better job of that next week when I'm in class together, because sometimes feeling it out on your own body is helpful, or seeing it traced on another person's body is helpful. But at any rate, at least we got this started this week. Okay, so be aware of the vertebra. Be aware of the parts of the vertebra, the substructures of the vertebra. Be aware of where the ribs are touching the vertebra and how they form your rib cage, okay? All right, going to clear the drawing. Again, if I'm going too fast, just pause and think about the content. Pause the video and think about the content. Okay, going to go back. All right, going to go clear the drawing on this, clear all drawings, and there we go. Going to go up to the left-hand side here, take us back to our full skeleton, okay? All right, so we've highlighted the first week we were together, we highlighted the bones of the skull. We've now shown you the vertebral column. I've shown you some features of the thoracic vertebra and where the ribs touch them. I've also highlighted for you, although you can do it easily on your own, the sacrum and the coccyx. Okay, so we have basically covered the entire axial skeleton, other than highlighting, of course, the hyoid bone, which is right here, right? The hyoid bone's right under your mandible. Okay. Okay, so let's do the following. Let's start with the axial skeleton and build the right arm, all the bones associated with the wrist and fingers. So please, if you would, go ahead, bring up the skeleton on your screen. Click the frontal bones, probably easiest. Highlight that. Keep clicking the top term until you find the word axial. Okay. We've got the axial skeleton here. All right. Now, go up and hit isolate. 1, 2, 3, add. There we go. We've isolated the axial skeleton. Now, what we're going to do is start building the right arm on the axial skeleton together. Okay, so from the profile shot, this is what it looks like. We're going to add the necessary anatomy next. Okay, so we're now starting on the axial skeleton. Excuse me, not the axial skeleton, the appendicular skeleton. The appendicular skeleton is going to be basically your shoulders, your arms, your hips, your legs. So shoulders, arms, wrists, and hands, hips, legs, ankles, and feet. That would be your appendicular skeleton. Okay. All right, let's write that down. Okay. All right. So, as nice as it is to have complete anatomy, for right now, I think some of the connective tissue continues to be distracting. So every time the software puts it in, I'm going to take it back out. So go ahead to Systems View, go up to Ligaments, and just click that once or twice so that connective tissue goes out of there. Okay. All right, let's begin on the right side of the body. So let's add anatomy search, the right scapula. 1, 2, 3, add. There we are, the right scapula. No surprises here, right? Now, you noticed on today's quiz, I showed you a picture of the scapula and asked you a substructure. Critical to answering that question correctly was, let me isolate this. Can you tell, when you're looking at the anterior surface of a bone or the posterior surface of a bone? Notice that right now you're looking at the anterior surface. I know this is anterior because the posterior surface of the scapula always has this bony ridge here, which is called the spine of the scapula. So you're always going to want some kind of visual trigger in your memory base that lets you know what surface of the bone you're looking at. This piece right here. Okay, let me zoom this down. this piece right here, right? This is the scapula. This is the spine of the scapula. That's always on the posterior surface. So if you can see it, you're viewing the posterior surface of the scapula. If you can't see it, you know you're looking at the anterior surface of the scapula. All right. I want to go back one click here and the second one click there. Okay. All right. So we've got the right scapula here. Let's add the right clavicle. Right clavicle. 1, 2, 3, add. There's your right clavicle. Okay. Notice how the clavicle comes from your sternum, the top of the sternum, which is the manubrium, and comes over here towards the scapula. Okay. So you want to think about how all these bones are coming together, how they interact with each other, right? So here's the clavicle that's highlighted. Here's the manubrium of the breastplate, the sternum, that interacts here and comes over towards the scapula itself. Okay. So here we have on the scapula, we have the, I'll draw it for you. This knob here is the coracoid process, and this knob here is the acromion or acromion process. Okay. All right. Let me clear the drawing. And let's continue our work. So our goal is to make the right arm. So ask yourself, what bone interfaces with the scapula? Well, 1, 2, 3, it's got to be the humerus, right? There's nothing comical about this. It's the humerus. All right. So let's anatomy search humerus, Humerus. Add that on the right side. 1, 2, 3, add. There you go. All right, so things are looking very good up here now. We've got the clavicle, scapula, humerus. Okay. Ask yourself, as you're learning this, ask yourself, well, okay, what substructure of the humerus interacts with the scapula? Well, it's the head of the humerus, and it interacts with the glenoid cavity of the scapula, right? So the head of the humerus is here. Let me show it to you. Here's the head of the humerus. And the glenoid cavity of the scapula is here, right? So the head of the humerus locks into the glenoid cavity of the scapula. That's how your arm fits into your shoulder socket. Okay. All right. Let me clear the drawing on that. And let's continue. Okay. So we can go over some more of this next week, but our goal next week is to finish the skeleton. So I'll be focusing on the hips and legs next week. Okay. So please review this. Please spend a lot of time thinking about it, practicing it, and you'll be fine. You'll do well. If you put in the time, you will do well. Okay. Now, I'm going to shrink this down a little bit because one of the bad things is, unless you have a very tall vertical monitor, it's hard to put the entire skeleton on. All right, so next, now we need to form the elbow, don't we? So what 3 bones come together to form the elbow? Well, let's see, we got the humerus. What are we missing? The radius and the ulna, the radius and the ulna. So let's add those, okay? Question to you. Which bone is on the same side as your thumb? Which bone is on the same side as the thumb? Is it the radius or the ulna? It's the radius. The radius is always on the thumb side. So let's add the radius. Radius. add. Okay, so it's hard to show this. Okay, but if there was a wrist down here, the thumb would be coming off of this bone, so to speak. Okay, so the radius is always on the thumb side. All right, next, the ulna. Add the ulna on the right side. 1, 2, 3, add. There we go. All right. Okay. Now remember, one of my quiz questions today was with the ulna bone. I was asking for a substructure, wasn't I? So with the ulna highlighted, let's go to the details here. Okay. I was asking you on your quiz question about this piece right here, which is color-coded yellow right now, wasn't I? So go ahead and click that if it's up on your software, and you'll see that it in fact is the radial notch. That was the answer to the question. Okay, clear that. And I'm going to go back one click, and here we go. Okay, so we've got the shoulder formed from the clavicle, scapula, and humerus. We've got the elbow formed from the humerus, radius, and ulna. Okay. It's, excuse me, it's informative to go ahead and look where the ulna interacts with the posterior surface of the humerus. Might be something you should spend a little bit of study time with. And that's what your word bank is designed for you to do, is to pick out the substructures and start thinking about how they interact with each other. Okay. All right. Next. All right. Next, we have to do the wrist. Okay. So the wrist has a bunch of tiny little bones and is a pain in the rear, to be frank. I mean, new students usually hate it because it has all these tiny little bones. Before I go any further, let's just be sure that we're writing some things up here. Okay, so when we talk about the shoulder, of course, we have the clavicle, scapula, and humerus. And when we talk about the elbow, of course, we have the humerus, the radius, just on the thumb side, and the ulna. All right, now let's start talking about the wrist. Okay, again, if I'm going too fast, pause your video and think about the content that's being presented. Okay, so the tiny little bones of the wrist are called carpals, C-A-R-P-A-L-S. And there's a nice way to bring them up in the software. What you're going to want to do in the software, and I'll put this in here, tiny bones of the wrist. You can bring them in as a group by doing an anatomy search for the term carpus, C-A-R-P-U-S. So let's go down to anatomy search and type in carpus, C-A-R-P-U-S. We're doing the right arm at this time. So carpus, comma R for the right side. Let's add it. 1, 2, 3, add. Wow, look at that. Okay, that's kind of crazy, isn't it? There we go. There we go. All right. Look at these little bones, all this mess of little bones. Isn't it wonderful that you have to know them? I'm speaking sarcastically, folks. It's hard work and you can do it. Okay, so there's a couple strategies to make these bones easier, okay? And first is think about the layering of these bones, okay? So I'm going to do in the software what I call multi-select. So go ahead and do multi-select. and click these 4 bones here. These 4 bones are proximal bones of the wrist. Okay, proximal bones of the wrist. So that's sort of like the first layer of bones. Okay, proximal. P for proximal. Okay. So what does proximal mean? Proximal mean the structure, in this case, these tiny little bones, are closest to the limb's attachment point to your axial skeleton. These little bones that you see highlighted are ever so slightly closer to your shoulder than the bottom row of bones, aren't they? That's why this is the proximal row. So right now, the proximal row is highlighted blue, and I have a line there going over them for P for red proximal. I'm going to show you now with, let's use maybe purple. Let's use purple here, show you the distal row. Here's your distal row of bones, okay? D for distal. So learning the wrist bones gets easier, not easy, but easier if you appreciate the proximal and distal rows of the bones and how they're stacked on each other. The proximal row is right up against the surface of the radius and ulna. The distal are bones that are up against the proximal bones, okay? So think about your definition of proximal and distal. Define proximal and distal at home. Okay, think about what that means. Now, I'm going to turn your attention to your textbook because your textbook presents this content very nicely, and it also has an interesting mnemonic. It has a crazy sentence where the words are placed in the order where the first letter of each word is a memory trigger for the bones. Okay, so I'm going to momentarily switch to your book. Okay, and let's see here. I'm in chapter 8, the appendicular skeleton, and I'm in figure 8.7, right? Figure 8.7 of chapter 8, figure 8.7 of chapter 8. And here we have the mnemonic. Stop letting those people touch the cadaver's hand. Notice the mnemonic is ordered by the proximal and distal rows of bones, which I just tried to highlight for you in visible body. Proximal is scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, pisiform. S for scaphoid, so the S corresponds to stop. L for lunate, so L corresponds to letting. T for triquetrum corresponds to those. P for pisiform stands for people. Okay. Then we have the distal row of bones. Trapezium, T for touch. Trapezoid, T for the. Capitate, C for cadavers. Hamate, hand. Okay. So let me shrink this up a little bit and let's write this down in our notes. But again, you want to be looking at for the wrist bones. You want to be looking at figure 8.7 in the textbook. Okay, notice I said textbook. I didn't say lab manual. I said textbook. Figure 8.7 in the textbook. And we want the mnemonic. Okay, stop letting those people touch the cadaver's hand. Okay, let me see if I can make this a little bit wider. Stop letting those people touch the cadaver's hand. Okay, underneath that we have scaphoid bone. Then we have the lunate bone. Trying to organize this a little bit so you can read it on the screen. Then we have triquitrum. Then we have pisiform. I'll go back to visible body in just a moment. Then we have trapezium for touch. Trapezium, then trapezoid underneath that. This is so much easier when I have just a whiteboard in front of you to write, but we'll do the best we can. Then capitate, then hamate. Okay, so this is the mnemonic for the wrist bones. Scaphoid, lunate, triquitrum, pisiform. That would be the proximal row, right? Proximal. 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 Pisiform is the last proximal bone. Then trapezium is distal. Distal, trapezoid distal, and the last two are also distal. They're probably going to run out of space here to write this, okay? This is all distal. Okay, so hopefully you get the idea. Go to figure 8.7 in your textbook. Take a look at that mnemonic. Memorize it. Let it help you learn the bones of the wrist, which individually are carpal bones, C-A-R-P-A-L. As a group is the carpus. So, okay, let me let me go back here. I'm going to clear my drawing on visible body, and let's go through this. Okay, so here we are. Right. First bone, scaphoid, stop. Next bone, and notice over here, this is the thumb side, isn't it? Okay, this is the thumb side, right? This is the thumb side over here. So we have scaphoid. Next, next we have the lunate. Notice how the lunate is kind of in between the radius and ulna, right? It's kind of right in the middle here between the radius and ulna. That might be a nice memory trigger for you to visualize that lunate is sort of right in the middle between the radius and ulna, right? It's kind of like right there. All right, so scaphoid, lunate. Turn this drawing off. Next bone is the triquetral. Software says triquetral. Textbook says triquetrum. Tomato, tomato. You can say it either way you want. You'll get credit on the exam. It doesn't matter to me. Okay. All right. And then the last bone on the proximal row is the pisiform. The pisiform is nice because it literally looks like a pea. I mean, it's kind of like a rounded, small, tiny bone on the pinky finger side. Okay. All right. Now, I think if you're following along with the logic of this is, you can just continue the mnemonic. So next we have the trapezium over here. Can't quite see it. Trapezium is the first bone on the distal row of the thumb side. Trapezium, followed by trapezoid. followed by capitate, followed by this big bone here, the hamate. Okay? All right. So let's see. If I was with you, I, of course, would ask if you have questions, but I can't do that today. So if you have questions, write them down, bring them into class next week, take them to a tutor, go to a study mate, track the answer down to your questions. Okay. One thing I would like to point out to you here, and I'm going to erase my drawings, is that the pisiform is a very good bone to highlight to know whether you're looking at the anterior surface of the wrist or the posterior surface. So watch this. Watch this. Right now, you're looking at the anterior surface, and you can clearly see the pisiform, right? What happens if you rotate this so that you're looking at the posterior surface of the wrist? You notice that all of a sudden, when you're looking at the posterior surface of the wrist, you can't see the pisiform. So if you can see the pisiform, you're looking at the anterior surface. If you cannot see the pisiform, you're looking at the posterior surface of the wrist. Again, not rocket science, but these little things can very much, if you keep them in your mind, they can very much help trigger your memory to answer questions correctly on the upcoming exam in 2 weeks. All right, so right now you're looking at the wrist and you don't see the pisiform, so this is the posterior surface. But right here, you can see the pisiform, so you're definitely looking at the anterior surface of the wrist. Okay? Okay, so use your textbook, learn that mnemonic. It gets a little bit easier, okay? You can do this. You can totally do it. All right, next, let's continue. So we've got, excuse me, we've got the tiny little bones of the wrist done. What's next? Well, now we need some of the bones that sort of form your surface of the back of the palm of your hand, right? So we need our metacarpals or metacarpus, okay? So please type in metacarpus, 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 and add that on the right-hand side. 1, 2, 3, add, okay? All right. So this can be helpful to look at this. All right. Notice that the first metacarpus is on the thumb side. And this is as presented. I don't know if I can show you in the video. This is as presented in anatomical position. It's not really coming up good on my screen here, right? But in anatomical position, my palms are forward and my thumbs are away from my midline. Well, my thumbs are number 1 for the metacarpals, okay? So thumb is metacarpal 1. Thumb is metacarpal 1. The thumb side is metacarpal 1. All right. So we have the first metacarpal on the thumb side, and then we just go around towards the midline of the body, right? So we have the second metacarpal, third metacarpal, fourth metacarpal, fifth metacarpal on the pinky side when you're looking at the skeleton in anatomical position. Okay? Thumb, 1 metacarpal, 2 metacarpal, 3 metacarpal, 4 metacarpal, 5 metacarpal. Okay. You know, as you are learning these, certainly know that the first metacarpal is on the thumb side. Other things you might want to, take a look at it. Isn't it true that both the fourth and fifth metacarpals are touching the hamate, right? They're both touching the hamate, right? What I'm saying is here and here, right? So start connecting the dots, so to speak, form yourself a little network of connected bones things start to get easier. Okay. All right. Clear the drawing here. All right. So next we have to add our phalanges. Okay. So go ahead, anatomy search. We're going to start adding the proper parts of our fingers, if you will. Okay. So we've added all the bones of the wrist, the carpus. We've added all the bones of the metacarpus. Now we've got to add your phalanges. I believe for the software, we're going to have to do this individually. So let's type in phalanges. Yeah, if you just type in PHA, the software is going to bring up options. And unfortunately, I've never found a way for the software to add them all at once. So we'll do it the old-fashioned way. With what's presented, PHA, find the first digit, right side, thumb, add that. There you go. There are two phalanges for the thumb. Two phalanges to the thumb. Now, a question I might ask right now, I would not ask it on the exam because I will only ask you to identify anatomy on the exam. But right now, I might ask you, of the two bones that are currently highlighted in your software, A or B, A or B, is it A or B, which is the proximal phalange? Well, is it A or B that's the proximal phalange? Clearly it's B, right? Because B is closer to the attachment point of the limb to the shoulder. All right, so clear the drawing on that. So the thumb has two phalanges. Let's go back to anatomy search and add the rest of the phalanges for the rest of your fingers. Okay, so the second one, add that. Okay, so we've got three phalanges there. We've got we've got the proximal, we've got the middle or intermediate phalange, and then we have the distal. Okay, so your fingers, which is your fingers, not your thumb, your fingers, not your thumb, have three phalanges. Your thumb has two phalanges. Okay, so add the rest there. The third finger, fourth finger, and fifth finger on the right-hand side. Okay, I think that will do it there. All right, folks, we have formed your hand. Okay. All right, so it's hard to show everything we've done, but we've actually accomplished a fair amount today. I'm going to shrink it down, right? Woo. Okay, so we showed you all the anatomy of your vertebral column. We showed you how the vertebrae of the vertebral column stack together. We built your shoulder joint. We built your elbow joint. We put together your wrist with the tiny little bones. We added the metacarpals. We added the phalanges. We built everything on the right side of your arm. It's going to be the same thing on the left side, just on the left. Okay, so I'm not going to explicitly build that with you here in the video, but it's going to be the same thing. Maybe at home, you could take time to construct the left side, just like we did together with the right side. Okay, whatever works for you for your study time, use it. Next week, I will continue this endeavor. We will build out your hips. We will build out your leg. We will specifically talk about your ankle, your foot, your toes. And you know what? At that point, we will have constructed the entire skeleton together. Think about how you did on the practice quiz at the start of the video. If you didn't do well, ask yourself, why not? Are you not spending enough time studying? Or are you spending lots of time, but it's not sticking in your memory banks? If it's not sticking in your memory banks, go see an academic coach. Get to an academic coach, which you recall. Let me show you this. If you forget how to get an academic coach, you go to the Hack website, 3 vertical lines, 3 horizontal lines, excuse me, 3 horizontal lines, Learning Commons and Library, Learning Commons and Library. Go into the tutoring column, go to the academic coach setting. The academic coach is someone that's going to try to help you get better study skills so that information sticks in your brain. But there's no magic recipe. You just got to do the hard work, okay? If you do it, you're going to be successful. Okay. So with that, I'm going to close out this video. And I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. And we'll continue from there, okay? So stay well, and I'll see you all